Hello, everyone. Okay, I am live and I'm going to try to invite. Let's see if I can do this. Co host, there we go. Boom.
Hello.
Hi, Katharine. How are you?
Good. And how are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, a bit nervous, but we'll see how it goes.
Don't be nervous. I mean, it's just at least the way that I've been doing them in the recent past is, just a fun way to get to know each other. And the way I think live works, unless someone wants to correct me, is that any viewers that I have can now be introduced to you and vice versa. So, hello. As we go along, obviously you can see people on your end who ask you questions and vice versa. So, yeah.
Yeah,
But I guess I'm just very happy that you wanted to do this and to arrange time because you're over in Cambridge, right?
yeah. So it's early evening
Nice
here,
one.
and we've had a really blustery day. I was out earlier walking around Cambridge because my books are set here, and I go out now and again, and I just take photographs of things or do little films. And I went to the top of the college tower today, so I'm probably going to do a post on it tomorrow. And it was blowing a gale up there, and I've got my I've got my little phone, and I'm trying to hold it steady
Oh
in the
no.
wind. So yeah, it was quite an English spring day, really. But you're out in you're in Georgia, is that right?
Yes, I am in Roswell, Georgia, in the U.S., and it has been overcast all day, so it's not a very pretty day, but not that windy on my end.
And what's the temperature like there now then?
Oh, I think we were in like the low 60s this today. We were
Okay,
warmer, but had a recent rain, so very different than I think England at the moment.
great, good. Well, I think this I'm new to TikTok, so it's just been a revelation just accessing all these book talkers, quite frankly, all over the world. It's just been incredible.
Oh yes, I agree. It's a totally different experience because I've been used to, fortunately, talking with other authors in and around my area, but it's a new experience being able to utilize book talk in this kind of fashion. So I'm very excited. And I
Yeah, no,
guess
it's great.
one thing I like to start out with is always letting you introduce any work you have that you want to talk about, and vice versa again, because we'll just let our own viewers become familiar and then we can go from there.
Sure. Okay. So I write urban fantasy or YA fantasy. It's sort of fairly similar, sort of like audience really for it both. And all my books are basically set here in Cambridge, UK. So I was a student here, and I came back a few years ago to be a fellow in my old college. And my series is basically a fantasy series, an urban fantasy series set in this university. And growing up here, I sort of went to school here, and then I went to university here. I was really into fantasy books, and I used to spend more time, quite frankly, in the children's bookshop reading fantasy than I did in the law
Hmm.
library. And I always thought, wouldn't it be a great setting for a fantasy novel? And when I came back a few years ago, no one had done it yet, and I thought, well, okay, why not have a go? And so I published my first book. My debut novel was the one behind you, which is College of Shadows,
Yeah.
and it's set in my old college, and it's a fantasy mystery set in my old college. And I went indie because I didn't think anyone would publish it, traditionally, and it became an
Oh,
Amazon bestseller. So then I was under quite a lot of pressure to write another one, so I wrote another one. I wrote the sequel,
oh
which is
wow.
Gate of Shadows, and again follows on the key characters from the first book, and again the sort of the fantasy aspects get more dark and more real and so forth. And I'm just about to finish the manuscript for book three. So basically, that's my main series.
That's fantastic. I see actually just someone chimed in, Scholar of Shadows, and said that they are a reader of your books. And so it's kind of fun. See, there you go. We're getting a little crossover right there. But
That's
I
great.
actually
Good.
wanted to let you know that I absolutely love your book covers. I was looking at them, going through all your pictures and everything, and I just love the design and the feel of your book cover design.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. Yeah, we I wasn't quite sure what to do, so I wanted to basically, because it's urban fantasy, I thought it'd be nice to sort of have a cover which sort of gives an impression of what the setting is. And we contacted, I don't know where you get yours done, but our book covers are done by a company of people that actually used to work in some of the big design agencies in London, and
Really?
then, like a lot of us, when they had families, they moved out,
Mhm.
and they live in the sort of like the far folds of the East End of England, and not sort of like a sort of like a very highfalutin place, but they do brilliant covers, and they've just been great
Cover.
for me.
Yeah, they're
So
they're
what about
spectacular.
so what about your series then?
Okay, well, I've been publishing since 2016. Got off to a very very slow start because back in the olden days we didn't have all these platforms, and I was one of those authors who never knew the right questions to ask and when to ask them. So it took me a long time before I could pick up speed. But right now, I actually am very happy to say that I have 3 series. One is a full series, and my debut series is a new adult shifter fantasy. It starts with the first book, Asara's Claws. I wish there was a way to. I was talking to another author the other day. Wish there was a way to
Oh yeah,
watch this when we were alive so you could
yeah,
actually see it better. But that particular series, Masara's Claws, is the first book of the Viking Saga, and that's set
yeah.
in a kingdom where humans and the native shapeshifters called therimorphs have begrudgingly lived side by side for a number of years. And at the beginning of the book, they have to now figure out if they can push aside their differences to now fend off an oncoming threat. So that kind of sets up that one. It's a 4-book series and it's complete. My other 2 series are actively being published simultaneously because I decided to be crazy and do that. I don't know why. But I have a young adult adventure portal fantasy that starts off with a book called The 12 Tasks, and the series is The Jed
Yeah.
Chronicles. And I have the first 2 books published right now, and that's set in a multiverse with 12 magical worlds. And in the beginning, since existence started, there have been periodic points where the balance that maintains all life has been threatened. And during those moments, a hero, or in this case, a heroine, arises to try to help set things right. But it's a fun one because you do a lot of world jumping. It's heavily inspired by mythologies from all around the world, and it's been just such a fun one to develop. My 3rd series is only in ebook form right now, and it's an adult Viking fantasy. And so that one, readers will get to experience Yggdrasil, the World Tree, all 9 realms. And yes, you'll get glimpses of the Thor and the Loki and some of these gods that people recognize from Marvel and whatnot. But I'm actually starting with some rather obscure lore and working my way to some of the more mainstream ideas.
Gosh, so 3 very different genres, really.
Yeah, I mean, they all fall under high fantasy or epic fantasy, but yeah, they range in obviously age brackets as well as the level of how gritty they are. But it's been fun.
So I don't know about you, but I found that I don't know, when I was reading things like Harry Potter, it starts like fairly engaging, then it gets darker and darker as the sort of as J.K. Rowling went on, and it sort of feels like you're sort of trying to you're actually moving in some quite dark areas with your Viking saga.
Yeah, so that's why it's been fun to kind of split what I write. So I have my lighter adventure young adult series, and then counterbalancing it with my adult series, which is going to tend to be far more dark. I mean, Viking mythology, well, Norse mythology and the Viking culture both have very dark histories, and so it is a nice balance. Of course, every time I'm editing, I have to remind myself what book I'm editing,
Yeah.
who's the main character, what are we doing, and I have to reset each time. I have a question that popped up, and I was asking about audiobooks. Now, for me, I'm actually going through the process of having my first book, Asara's Claws, which is that new adult shifter fantasy, turned
Yeah.
into an audiobook as we speak. I was fortunate to find an actual group of sound actors, so each character will have their own voice actor or actress, and it'll be kind of a little bit more like an old school radio program than some of the more mainstream or current day audiobooks. So hopefully that will release towards the end of this year, but crossing fingers, everything has been slowed down due to COVID. So crossing fingers, that's my goal, to release my first audio by the end of the year. How about you, Mark?
So yeah, I'm a massive audio fan, and I sort of got into audio. There used to be a tradition in the UK. The BBC used to do these like dramatizations of things like The Hobbit, and they became huge phenomena. When I was a boy, and I've always loved audio. And I think the whole idea of how someone's like basically reading a story to you is just so exciting for me. So, and then I actually I've had a lifelong hobby of painting toy soldiers, and I worked for many years for a company called Games Workshop who make fantasy toy soldiers. And they sort of come unassembled and unpainted, and part of the hobby is actually to paint them, in sort of like the way you want them to. And most of us who actually do some miniature painting will listen to audiobooks or podcasts or whatever. But for me, it was audiobooks. So actually, I think when I started writing myself, I was really keen to actually have the books in an audio format for that reason. And I had an interesting experience actually for my first. So when I launched College of Shadows. It seemed like a huge amount of money to get an audiobook made.
Yeah.
So I went, so as I'm sure you were finding, and so I went to, we used ACX, which is the Amazon sort of version, and we found ourselves a really lovely narrator, a really nice voice, and he also produced it himself, and we thought he did a great job. But then when we launched it, we got quite a lot of negative feedback about the production quality. So when I finished the second book, I had this really difficult decision to make. So I worked with my wife, Karina. She sort of does the finances. My son, Michael, who does the marketing, and myself. And we had a long, hard chat about it. And we thought, actually, we really need to redo book one. And so we went to an audiobook production company called Chatterbox here in the UK. And they had a different narrator, or they offered us some different narrators to the original one. So we actually switched narrator, and we got a really terrific narrator, and we re-recorded book one, and then we recorded book two, and we're going to use them again for book three. And if I'm honest, it was like 3 times more expensive, but probably worth every penny because the quality is just so good.
And I'll pause that because I have a little point on that, but I did have another thing that popped up asking. Oh, okay. The name of my young adult series was The Jed Chronicles. That's DJED. And the first book is The 12 Tasks. Sorry, someone was just clarifying that. But going back to the audiobook thing, yes, I go right now. I'm using ACX, crossing fingers that it works. But there is, and if anybody is interested in going through a platform like that, just be aware there are so many voice actors and their level of quality varies dramatically. And there are different ways you can hire and work with voice actors. And so you do have to kind of feel around for a while and make sure you are very familiarized with whomever you choose. Because yes, I have noticed when I was looking, there is such a drastic difference because some people are filming on their couch at home. Other people have sound studios or work professionally. So big range.
It is a big range, and I think it's like anything. I mean, at the end of the day, as an indie author, we're sort of competing with the big publishers. So when we put a book out, we really want it to feel as good as something by Random House or whoever. And so I think we sort of took the view, actually, we try and get everything right. So we did invest in the covers, we invested in the editors, and I think the only sort of compromise we ever made was that first attempt at an audiobook, and we regretted it immediately. So I think we've very much taken the view, like yourself, make sure you get a really good production quality, and then it's out there forever, and all the reviews you get, will be hopefully really good ones, and you'll just go on from there.
Of course. And I guess it's unfortunate for me because unlike you, I have not really listened to a lot of audiobooks. I probably should. It would probably be very smart to have them on while I have some background work, but I've not actually done that. So I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know, what kind of sounds were popular, because there are different kind of, I think, voices that do resonate more, or types of voices that resonate more to certain people than others, but had no clue. So like I said, crossing fingers that mine comes out. I'm very excited. I've heard a couple samples so far, and they all sound great. So again, crossing fingers. But Yeah, for
Yeah.
anybody, audiobook is a tough thing to get into, but when you figure it out and you have your voice actor or actress, keep them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, especially because you're writing series, and what you don't really want to do is to actually change narrator mid-series. So yeah, getting the right team is really important. And yeah, one of the things that we found actually was that I think it's I find actually I get a slightly different customer mix on my audio than I do to the ebooks and the printed books. So definitely get slightly more men listening to audio,
Interesting.
which
Okay.
is yeah, which is really interesting. And I went to the London Book Fair a few years ago and listened to some people talking about it. And there's quite a distinctive shift in people actually listening to audio. I'm not quite sure why it is, but it's another reason why I was really keen to actually get into audio, because I figured there's probably different reading groups out there, and actually there's plenty of readers who don't necessarily go with printed books, but they prefer audio.
Oh, I think that goes with all formats, because even like there are people who are ebook only, or even subcategories like KU for ebook only, and others are, I'm a print person. I have a few ebooks downloaded on my Kindle, but I actually prefer print, either hardback or paper, hardcover or paperback, but everybody has their preference, what they listen to. So like you said, the more formats you have, the wider range of readership I think you can potentially attain. I have a question. It was saying, question about exactly where voice actors were from. You said you were working from another company outside of ACX?
Yeah, so they actually do they do work with ACX, but some
Okay.
narrators on ACX actually are working with a production company, and I found them through ACX. But I noticed that actually the credits included the name of this production company, and so I just contacted them and had a chat. In fact, I contacted 2 or 3 production companies and had a chat about how they did it, and they used narrators from ACX, but it wasn't one that I'd spotted the first time I went round. And there's a chap called Kieran Seward, and Kieran actually my books have multiple points of view. So we don't have one main character in the book. So with a multiple point of view, and because they're set in a university context, you get lots of different nationalities and lots of different like regional accents. So I needed someone who was really good, who could do a great Scottish accent, a great Welsh accent, all that sort of stuff. And Kieran was fantastic for those. And so yeah, I think actually it was quite useful actually using that production company, because when they read the book, they could say, yeah, we're going to need this type of voice actor because he's going to have quite a range.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I did, I noticed you've got a subscriber, you can have a mailing list. What we actually did was we actually did a survey. We sent a survey out to all the people who read the book. And we asked them what type of voice they thought would work as the main narrator's voice. And they gave us, a profile of sort of like, they wanted to be male and they wanted to be in a certain sort of age range, like 30-year-old would be the ideal, with what they called a BBC accent. So like a fairly sort of like middle of the range, quite accessible accent. And so that was actually, in a sense, the sort of the key steer we went with. But speaking to the production company, they said, no, you're going to need someone who can do that. That's their standard voice, but they've got to have this range of voices that can cover the other points of view in your story. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, like for me, again, I guess Novus Opera is the name of the group that I work with, but I got them through ACX. And if you're interested in finding people to be voice actors, obviously ACX is a very big powerhouse. And like I said, there are a lot of people you can search and find. And if you're on it and you're trying to turn a book into an audiobook, there are several ways. Obviously, you can record your own voice. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I don't have the setup. You can do samples and bid out, and then depending on the voice actor, if they're actively looking for work, they may stumble upon your bid and give you a sample. So in that way, you can listen to a bunch of people applying to your book because they already have interest in what you have. That's how I did it. And then the third way is you can scroll through their log of gosh knows how many audio people, and you can listen to samples that they have, the voice actors have on their particular profile pages. But of course, then you have to kind of work in your mind, does that apply to your character or not? So I like the bidding process because that way I could force whomever to read my character's dialogue or an action scene so I can kind of hear it and be like, yes, I like this person, or no,
Yeah.
you're not a great fit. So
Yeah.
that's the way I approached it. But there are a lot of ways you can find a voice actor even through a platform like ACX.
Yeah. So, like I said, I think it's a really, I think it's a really interesting format. I personally love it, so I'm sort of invested in it. And I've got a couple of people who've just logged on, a couple of my readers logged on who've actually listened to the audiobooks, and they love them. And one of the things I quite like about it is that we've got quite a few Japanese people reading my books who come over here to study, and they quite like getting the audio version and also the print version. So they actually read it and they're listening to the audio at the same time, which again, I hadn't really thought about before, but actually, I thought, well, yeah, that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? It's much easier for some people to take the information in that way. So yeah, well, I'm really excited. I hope you have a lot of success with yours. Like I said, I think you'll find, some people really love that format, and they'll become super loyal to you because you've got that.
Okay, I have a question that popped up, and it said, with all the characters you have created, what was your favorite one to create and why? So I'll let you start that one out.
Oh gosh, that's so difficult. So I've got 4 main characters. So the way to sort of think about the books is it's a bit like Stranger Things sort of meets the theory of everything sort of thing. So we've got sort of like your 4 characters, like they're an unlikely alliance. We've got a couple of freshers come up to Cambridge for the first time, Nick and Annabelle. And Nick comes from where I sort of spent most of my life, which is the Midlands, Nottingham. So working class background. And Annabelle she comes from a grammar school, which is like a slightly sort of higher level state school. And they come up and they're sort of like a bit wide-eyed, and the classic Cambridge imposter syndrome. You think someone's made a terrible mistake and they shouldn't have let you in, but somehow you snuck in. And so they both have that sort of imposter syndrome. And I really related to that when I was a student. I thought, they'd made a terrible mistake and mismarked the exam or something, and thought I was cleverer than I was. And so that's very much, what a lot of people think coming up. And so I quite like them because they have a lot of the emotions I had as a student. And then I've got a character called Giles, who I do like. He's possibly my favourite. And Giles is one of those characters. He's larger than life personality. He's not like me at all. So he's very confident, very, very bright. He's a scholar. And everyone thinks he's got it made because he's naturally gifted and so forth. But actually, he's deeply flawed, and a lot of it is an act. And I quite like playing that with Giles because he's the sort of larger than life character who can like walk into a room and hold sway, but behind the scenes is actually quite vulnerable. And I quite like him.
Yeah.
And then the sort of the older character in the foursome is a professor. Called Ravi Gupta, and he's from Nepal. And I chose Nepal simply because I know a little bit about Nepal, and I really like. I mean, we have a huge like multinational community here in Cambridge, and I wanted to make sure that I actually had a key person there who sees Cambridge slightly differently to everybody else, and allows almost like to like Cambridge in terms of an experience, the university, but also see it for all its foibles. And I like writing through Ravi's perspective because it allows me to sort of unpick some of the sort of cultural aspects of Cambridge life, which actually for people who are not from Cambridge and aren't immersed in it, actually he gives me a great way of describing what Cambridge is like, which is good.
That is fantastic. But yeah, for me, I guess it really depends on the book series because again, I've written 3, and so each series has a tremendous amount of characters. I have backlog lists of names, etc. that go on forever, it feels like. But I really do like almost an archetypal character of the warrior woman. I'm really big in female empowerment, but also showing that females can be strong and feisty, especially in settings where maybe it's patriarchal or uncommon for that to happen. So each of my books features a type of warrior woman, be it the lead characters like Ueva Cargan in the Incarn Saga, which is my Shifter series, or my young adult series, there's Katie of Earth, which I'm super biased by her because she was my alter ego growing up, and actually that book series is based on a lot of the worlds and characters and backstories my sister and I developed in our imaginary play as children, just updated.
Really?
Yeah, so that's
Wow.
why she has my name. So of course I bias to her, but each series, like I said, has a big powerhouse person. Herver is Lothbrand's daughter is a shield maiden. She's actually not necessarily she's not the main character in my Viking series, but she is still a force to be reckoned with. So I do have a lot of those people that I like, and the concept, like what you're saying, some of these other characters that have maybe more complicated pasts or have like major flaws that kind of emerge throughout the books. Those have been fun to write as well. But if I had to pick one, I would, I guess, pick Katie of Earth from the Jed Chronicles, my young adult series, because she is my alter ego from childhood and still is in many ways today.
Well, it's funny because I find that I sort of build up quite a lot of characters around the main characters. You know, there's interactions with other people in the university, whether it's staff or sort of other professors or other students or whatever. And what I try and sort of, you know, make sure they have, you know, interesting impacts on the storyline. And I don't know about you, but when whether it's a main character or a minor character, I do actually sort of do a little, I don't know, an A4 description of each one to myself, just to remind myself about who they are, what their background is, you know, what they look like, all that sort of stuff.
Their eye
And
color.
yeah,
The eye
oh,
color.
how terrible. I know, honestly, it's terrible, isn't it? I keep forgetting the eye color of a certain character. Anyway, and then what I found is after I'd completed my first draft, let's say, of one of the books, I just needed a break from that storyline before I started editing it. And so in that sort of break, I would then write a short story, just to do something different. And I found myself basing the short stories on one of the minor characters. So, and I put all the short stories into a collection of short stories, which I offer for free to anyone who subscribes. And each of those stories basically takes one of my minor characters and actually allows me to explore what actually happened to them in another context. And all the stories are sort of quite spooky and creepy. And they might not be directly related to the main arc of the books, but it allows me to see what they would do if they're put into quite a difficult situation. And so, yeah, I actually quite like some of my minor characters too. So.
That's I think some of the best fantasy are written by people who can essentially tell you the life story of pretty much any character, even how minimal in there, because with that richness that you can pull out different quirks, even though the character might be, again, very small or minor. When I was beginning my writing career, I was finishing up my first novel. And at that point, while I was about to wrap up, I had attended a writing conference. And one of our workshops was, we were given a challenge that said, hey, pick the most obscure character of your book and now tell me their backstory. And I was like, oh! Okay. And so I selected actually a character who was already deceased by the time my first book began, but kind of is related to some of the characters in my book. And because of that, and working through this process, I realized that Asara's Claws was not going to be standalone. There were going to be the other 3 books. So I came in with 1 book and came out with 4 after that conference. And I was just like, oh! So since then, I think that helped me approach writing in general. And unfortunately, some of my book series, my notes or style sheets, they run pages and pages and pages and pages just because I have so many random characters that I'm trying to cram in. And I love the interesting little quirks that you can kind of pull out.
Well, I think it's always quite nice to leave some loose ends, isn't it? Because I used to work, when I worked for Games Workshop, one of the things we used to do with the background work was we had these huge fantasy worlds for our miniatures. And what we tried to make sure in writing the history of those worlds was to make sure that we left lots of loose ends. And like you say, your avid readers will be very, very aware of those loose ends, and they'll always be nagging you to say, well, what happened to this, this particular faction, or, what about this character, and so forth. And actually, from a writing point of view, it's great because obviously, whilst you're focused on the novel you're writing at that time, you've got to make sure you do justice to that group of characters and that story arc. But actually, it's nice to know you've got these other loose ends you can play with later,
Oh yeah.
which can sort of take your readers down avenues that they're interested in, that actually were just like an idea you had when you were writing, and actually you've now got an excuse to explore them.
Yeah, and like kind of like what you were doing, you can turn that into anything from a short story to even all the way up to a full-blown side novel, a spin-off. Because if you really fall in love with, again, one of those side factions or side characters, you can give them a time to shine later on, which is, one of
Yeah.
those nice things of being a creative. You can always coming up with the next story, and you have a bunch waiting.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's just choosing which one to go for, isn't it? Really.
That's true. I have a log of all different kind of books that I want to write, and every time I situate which one's going to be the next step, I come up with another idea. Then I have to like reprocess how I'm going to attempt what comes next after I get through my series. Okay, I have another question that popped up, and it says, when writing, what is more important, world building or characters? What do you think?
It's an interesting question, actually. It's funny because the feedback I've been getting from some of my readers is that I have my four like human characters, but I also have a fifth character that appears in all the novels, which is basically Cambridge University.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, the world building there is like done for me because it's a real setting. And what I decided to do was when you sort of come up to Cambridge, it is an amazing place. I mean, for those of you, a lot of my readers have actually, either been to Cambridge or are interested in Cambridge. And when you come up to Cambridge, you can almost feel the history in the air. The buildings are just amazing. They're sort of Gothic and there's modernist, but there's like really ancient, sort of like, Elizabethan. So I think my college was built in 1511. So, and the first court is basically, it's a 16th century court, and the hall where we dine is a 16th century dining hall, and then you sort of move into second court and third court, and then over the river to New Court. And by the time you get to New Court, you're sort of like, you're talking about 19th century, and then you sort of got some 20th century buildings, and so actually, it's got a really rich background world, which I try and explore as well as the fantasy aspects. In fact, one of the lovely things about the series is that people aren't quite sure which bit is fantasy and which bit is real.
Oh yes.
and so actually some of the weirdest stuff that happens at Cambridge, which you think, oh, that can't be real, actually is, and because you have these amazing traditions. So I invest quite a lot of time in the world building, but I almost see the world as a bit of a character. And actually, I don't know what you find with your various series, but how your characters interact with the world they're in, that you set them in, actually is a big part of the storyline. And so I think actually, I don't think you, as a fantasy writer, I think you've got to do both, and you can't say one is more important than the other. I think actually they are really important. I think the background world helps you find out more about your characters, because them coming into contact with the stuff that happens in those really sort of like tough environments and challenging environments actually allows you to draw more out of the character themselves.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with your final point there, because for me it's exactly the same. So far, again, each book comes about different backstories of why I developed it and created it, but characters and their worlds almost simultaneously start interweaving with each other right off the bat. So it is kind of hard to detangle one, because you'll have cultures or societies that, based on maybe environment or politics, and that gives your character worldview, or vice versa. If you want a character with a certain perspective on life, you have to explain why, and then you go back into the world building and to give it, grounds. But I don't know if you can really separate the two necessarily, and depending on your approach as a writer, you might focus more on one than the other. But for me, yeah, definitely they are so interconnected. It's hard. It would be almost impossible to take them apart. Which for my Portal series, my young adult series, it was fun because I have a character from Earth and transferred into this awareness of these 12 magical worlds, and each of them has different dimensions. And so her interactions with all these different cultures kind of bring her new awareness, and then creating all these subcultures and all their point of views, and their anything from how religious they are, how much technology they have, all affects, how they live, act, and just exist.
Yeah.
So yeah, they kind of mesh together.
Yeah, so but I think it's one of those things that I mean, when you're doing your world building. So I had a question from one of my readers about this, which was so Lauren. She asked me, since fantasy tends towards worlds that are not like our own, how do you like to write exposition? I mean, how much do you actually write about the background world, for example, and how much do you actually share with the reader? Do you share it all up front, or do you like drip feed it in? How do you do that?
Well, since I work with different series, it all depends. And I do think that with the complexity of some of these world building or multiverse building, it's hard to give it all at once. So depending on how I approach it, it's probably, I feed it a little bit at a time until you kind of get a greater scheme. And then if on the next book, maybe I'll kind of introduce some of that stuff a little quicker on, and then kind of get into the next layer and another layer, etc., so on. But yeah, I don't think I would ever say I would introduce everything at once, because there's a lot to take in.
No.
And depending on the series, with my multiverse one, we're jumping around. So each, 3 more chapters in, you're experiencing a whole nother environment. So I kind of pace it out depending on how we're doing it. And with my Viking series, as they travel throughout the 9 realms of Yggdrasil, I really focus on where they are at current, and kind of mention, if I need to, some of the other worlds, just to kind of give you parameters. But that at least lets me kind of focus in on where we are, and not get lost in all this other stuff. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually, Sheena has read my stuff. One of my readers just said, sprinkling in, you sprinkle it in as you go along, and I sort of do that. I think I've got so the Cambridge. What's nice with the Cambridge aspects, because some of the characters know Cambridge very well. So, for example, Giles, the scholar, he's been there 3 years, so he knows how all the student stuff works. He will explain to the freshers how certain things work. So it allows me, with using Giles as a narrator almost, to actually explain to someone new to Cambridge, okay, so how does it work then in terms of supervisions and tutorials and things like that, which is great fun, because, having his particular spin on that, because he's a bit of a sort of irreverent character, is like a nice way of describing it to people. So every now and again, I like get stuff out through the voice of my characters. And obviously the older professor, he's a bit more erudite about it, but he sort of explains how things go on. But then, not to spoiler alert, they do step through into other worlds from Cambridge, and that I very much do that as an experiential learning. So no one really understands what's going on. It's actually as the characters experience it. As Sheena says, it's sort of sprinkled in that way. So no one's really quite sure, and I don't fully explain necessarily how the world does work. But although I've worked it out myself, actually I sort of like tease people how it works. So there's a bit of surprise in some aspects of how the world is working, because actually the characters don't know how it's working at that stage.
Oh, I like that, the exploratory aspect. Now, going to your kind of, the idea of perspective, do you write from one character's point of view, or do you switch between characters? How are your books compiled in that sense?
Yeah, so between characters, so I try and switch between my 4 main characters. Typically, I try and get the action to work sort of one after the other. Every now and again, there's a bit of overlap, so you might see a scene partly from one character and partly from another. But generally speaking, I say take one chapter, and one chapter will be that character's perspective of that chapter. And that character may actually run on into the next chapter with their point of view. But generally speaking, we're moving between the different characters during the course of the story. And every now and again, I will allow one of the minor characters to if it's really important that they actually see something from their perspective, so I understand why they do something, I might do that. But generally speaking, I'm basically it's a multi-point of view story. And if I'd known how difficult that was before I started, maybe I would have done it differently. But that was just how I saw the story, and actually I'm used to it now. So when I work in Scrivener, so I sort of basically, I know which my characters are, and I can basically check and make sure I'm getting sufficient perspective from each of the characters as I'm working way through the storyline. But before I invested in Scrivener, which allowed me to sort of get my thoughts structured in that way, I had a really big piece of paper across the wall with post-its on and trying to work out who'd seen which scene and that sort of stuff. And yeah, that was super complicated, and I've actually worked out how to do it more easily now.
Well, that's fascinating because I've been intimidated with the multiple point of view kind of writing. I mean, I enjoy reading it, but yeah, so far all three of my series only follow the point of view of one character, whomever is the main in that one, which is nice. It's fun because then you can learn things as the character's learning things, because you only know necessarily what she knows, etc. But I think it's also limiting because I think when you have those multiple points of view and able to, like you said, sometimes pull in maybe a third character, it can give you a little more richness, and you can also take the reader from one location to another and maybe parallel time frames, where writing from one point of view, you can only see what the person knows.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to connect dots back here, that's a little hard to explain when you're only showing one person's point of view. But yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I have a story in mind, just a single novel, where I kind of want to try to dabble with that, but I'm also very intimidated. I'm trying to figure out what scene would which character see, and et cetera, so on. So that's in one of my future date book attempts.
Well, it's funny. It's funny, isn't it? Because I was doing a series of talks at different schools not so long ago for another series I've written, and they were asking me which books influenced me, and so I because I was talking to a younger audience, I was trying to think what were the first books I'd read, and my mum used to take us on a Wednesday afternoon to the local library, and when I was telling the school children what were the first books I read, the first book I read was a book by a lady called Enid Blyton, and I'm not sure if she's in the States, but she was a very famous writer in the UK, and she was a bit like the J.K. Rowling of our generation. And Enid Blyton had these series of books, and they involved they were called the Famous Five, and the Famous Five they had basically 4 children and a dog called Timmy. Everyone remembers the dog's name. No one can remember the children's name, but basically four children and a dog called Timmy. They were the Famous Five, and actually it was a very interesting series of books because you did see different perspectives from the different ones. And then my next sort of really the first fantasy book I ever read was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and by C.S. Lewis. And I just the idea of stepping through a wardrobe and entering into a fantasy world, I checked all the wardrobes in my home, just to make sure there was nothing in the back of them. But and again, that's an interesting one because again, multiple points of view, and you do, you see it from Emma's perspective and Lucy's perspective and so forth. So I thought that was really interesting. And then obviously I moved on to The Hobbit and then on to Lord of the Rings. And of course, Lord of the Rings is very much a story from multiple points of view. And so I think I've always been quite attracted because of those early experiences about actually trying to look at the same situation through different eyes. And I love doing it with my 2 freshers, Nick and Annabelle, because I grew up with 2 sisters, an older sister and a younger sister, and it became clear to me fairly early on that we saw the world very differently, being a boy and a girl. And I love writing scenes with Nick and Annabelle where basically, I look at it from Annabelle's perspective, I look at it from Nick's perspective, and of course they're just going like this a lot of the time. They're just not connecting at all because one's a young man and one's a young girl, and that's great fun actually, playing with those different views.
Now, do you find it hard to write a character that's the opposite sex of you? I've only focused on female forward literature thus far, which is funny because most of my characters in all 3 of my series are male, except a couple females, including my main characters. So I don't know. I'm comfortable enough with it, but I've never tried to branch out where I truly immerse myself in a point of view of a young man.
Yeah, I think I have to be very careful because I really love Annabelle as a character, and I have to be really careful that I don't write her from a man's perspective. And so what's really nice is that, so we have a little convention at home. I've got Karina sitting over on the sofa, just checking I'm not saying anything silly, but Karina is my first proofreader. So what I typically do is I get up really early in the morning and I write early, and I try and get most of the stuff down before lunchtime, and then in the afternoon I will edit till about 4 o'clock, and then I'll do stuff like this, TikTok and social media and all that sort of stuff. And then in the evening, what I'll do is I read to Karina what I read that day. And she's just fantastic at like telling me dead straight. So Karina's Dutch, so they're pretty direct. And so she's great at telling me dead straight when I've got Annabelle wrong, which is fantastic. And then also I've got a terrific group of advanced readers. And my advanced reader group are just wonderful. And because the series is called Cambridge Gothic, I call them the Gothic Scholars. And
I love that.
and so you have to sort of apply to be a Gothic scholar, and we have a chat, and find out what people like reading and that sort of stuff. And I'm always looking for a really good group of people who are quite happy to give me feedback. And I'm not proud about it at all. If I get something wrong, I love to hear I've got it wrong, because I'll make it better. But I love it when I've got some really good Gothic scholars who can really help me with Annabelle and make sure, if I describe it, even just the phraseology said, no, a girl wouldn't say that. A boy might, but a girl wouldn't. And that's just really useful.
And I think that's something that, as a writer, still qualify myself as still a new-ish writer, that I've noticed I've evolved over the years, where initially I was very touchy about critiques, but nowadays I'm kind of like, if I have something wrong, let me know. Is there an error? Let me know. If there's a plot hole, point it out, because obviously once it's published, I can go back and tweak it if I really want to. On the other hand, it does challenge me to improve moving forward. And how can you make those improvements without being aware that there was an issue in the first place? So I do think critiques and ARC readers' input, or beta readers, or however people structure their editing and pre-publishing process, are very important. Now, do you use a true editor, or are you just relying predominantly on your own skills in betas and ARCs?
No. So I definitely use an editor. So yeah, I've got 3 editors. So I've got a development editor, Philippa, and she was the first one I ever sent my manuscript to. She had an agency then that would advise novice writers as to what they would need to do to get their book into the sort of shape to send off to a publisher. But she and I hit it off pretty early on, and she agreed to actually be the first person to read the manuscript after I've polished it as much as I can. And Philippa has been great. I mean, she does the big, reshaping it into something that is going to work. And then I've got a copy editor, and she's in Australia. And so Philippa, she was based in LA. Found her on the internet, but she was based in LA, working with script writers over there. And then my copy editor, she's down in Sydney. And that works quite well, because when I'm doing the copy editing, she sends me the amendments. I work on it during UK time, ping it off. She works on it while I'm asleep, and then the next morning we're good to go, sort of thing.
Wow!
So she's great. And then I've got a proofreader, and my proofreader again is fabulous. And she actually used to be based in Cambridge. She's moved away now, but she's great because she understands all the terminology for Cambridge University, and so she picks up on some of the things that might have slipped through the other 2 editors who aren't so familiar with Cambridge. So yeah, I've got a team of 3, and they're very long-suffering, coping with me, really, but they're great. What about yourself?
Well, for me, I've always had an editor who, thankfully, she kind of overlaps several different kind of subgenres. So she kind of does take the copy and the proofing and those kind of processes. And I've had very nice betas that have had that kind of background as well. So that kind of helps lead up to my editor. And then I always do a polish read through after that. And hopefully that means we've caught everything. That's not always the case, but hopefully, I mean, you could be surprised. You can have so many people's eyes on the same manuscript and still something gets through. But with that said, I've been very happy with the process, of course, of recent years, since I've been trying to attempt to publish 2 simultaneously. And bless her heart, the editor I've been working with for years is moving towards retirement. I definitely know I need to find a new one, or ones, depending on how they break down, going forward for my full length, while my old one continues to focus on my novellas, and for as long as she wants. But yeah, it's interesting trying to search for editors and finding that right match. And same thing for betas or ARC readers. I mean, finding that match is very important. And I know I'll be soon doing a shout out for some beta readers for my young adult series for the 3rd volume that's up and coming. But it's a lot of background work that goes into this.
There is, isn't it? It's funny, I was chatting to someone the other day and they said, oh, you finished the manuscript, so when can we see the book? And I said, it really depends a lot on how the editing goes, because, it could be a few months, it could be 6, depending on how much work there is involved in. And I think a lot of people, don't appreciate just what goes on behind the scenes. And I've had one of my readers, Sheena, has just said she'd love to have a Karina. So you got a job there, Karina. So that's great to know. So, but and Sheena says, you never catch everything, do you? There's always something. And I see loads of book top posts by authors who've said, just publish my book and just see my first typo. And when you think how many times we go through it, isn't it amazing those things slip through?
Oh yeah, I literally just posted, I think it was yesterday, one of those kind of TikTok videos where you open your book and you're like, why? And I will admit, there are sometimes, I think, during the formatting process where errors will come up on my end where, I'm trying to do something very fancy, and something happens. I drop a letter in the beginning, or I had a duplication of a paragraph that my ARC readers were like, that's twice right here. You need to delete one. I'm like, oh, how did that happen? It wasn't there before. I don't know. It's amazing how things, there are just so many steps in the process. I have a question that popped up that's asking, what made us want to become authors? So what made you, what inspired you to write in the first place?
Yeah, so I had that question as well. And I think it's interesting because I think, if I'm honest, when I was younger, I used to do a bit of writing, for school. If there was a writing competition, I'd write a story, and sometimes they got published in the school magazine and so forth. And English and history are my 2 favourite subjects at school. But when I applied to university, I didn't have the confidence to go down the writing route. I wasn't sure I would be good enough, and everyone said, you need to get a real job. And so I sort of read law at university, and after 6 years becoming a lawyer, I realised I hated it. So I stopped, and then as newly married, and there was no way I was going to be able to support us, or at least contribute, because Karina had a good job, and but we couldn't afford living where we were if I wasn't bringing some money in. So then I just went into business, and the writing sort of came much later. I mean, when we had children, I used to do a storytelling evening with them and their friends when they came home from school. And on a Friday evening, we'd sit them round the fire at home in Nottingham, and then they'd give me their middle names. So each one had their middle name, and then I would make up a story based on these characters who were basically taken from the middle names of each of the children. And that meant that they sort of knew it was them, but it wasn't them, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And then we sort of we do like a sort of organic sort of storytelling thing, and I used to love it. And then they said, Dad, could you write those up? And I had a go at writing 1 or 2 up, and then they sort of got a bit older, and as I said, I was working for Games Workshop, and I entered a short story competition because the Games Workshop are always looking for new writers, and they do a short story competition each year where hobbyists, fans of the stuff they do, can actually submit a short story. And so I actually I created a fictitious name because I didn't want them to know it was me. And I created this fictitious name and a fictitious email address, and I basically sent the manuscript in for this short story because I wanted to know whether it was any good. And I thought, if they don't publish it, it won't be because they knew it was me. It's just because it wasn't good enough. And anyway, they really liked it, and they published that. And I think that was the moment when I thought maybe I could become a writer, because when on a blind sort of competition, when they published the short story, I thought, oh, maybe I could do this. And then they published another one of mine, and really the rest went on from there, really. So I think it was actually, if I'm honest, I always wanted to be a writer, but I never really had the confidence until I was much older.
And that's it's sad, but that is a story that I've heard from a lot of authors, that people tell you, about the whole thing about getting a real job. You can't make money off writing, or people are self-deprecating, and they just don't have that faith in themselves to even try for the longest time. For me, I kind of going back to the fact that my young adult series, The Jet Chronicles, was inspired by my childhood. As I was growing up, I again loved those characters, loved those worlds, and realized I really did want to share them with people in some form, and writing just made sense. I love to read, of course, put it in a book. Obviously had no clue of how to approach that, and it went on the back burner, but I always talked about it, went to college, majored in things that had nothing to do with writing, that were just some of my other passions, because I have so many passions in life that, just trying to do them all. But after graduating college, that's when I was really decided, you know what, I'm going to try to write. And I was cobbling different kind of part-time jobs at the time, but was writing on the side. And I just made a choice that this first book that had sprung up right before I went into college, that was Asara's Claws, my shifter fantasy. And I was like, I'm going to make a point to get it done and publish it some way, shape, or form. And at the time, people just started talking about, and I became aware of indie and what indie was. So I did try, I think, to query people, but I didn't know the process. I don't think I was good at querying. It was my debut book, my first time I was writing something. So even though I got rejected, I wasn't put off by it. So I decided, hey, I'm going to still publish. And then from there, it encouraged me to continue. And, I feel like as a writer, you always want each book to get better. And so I'm very proud with all my books. I've gotten a number of recognition throughout, from my first one all the way to the new ones over the years. So, that also bolsters kind of confidence.
Yeah.
But it was a scary moment when I decided I'm going to be a full-time artist and author, and I'm doing this, and hopefully I can pay the bills and not fall on my face. I've been, struggling to build up my career that way, but it's not an easy thing. And no matter where you are in your life, I always encourage people to try. If you want to write a book, write a book. It's become so easy. Just understand, make sure you respect your work enough to find editors and find a good cover designer, and make sure it's the best it can be and not just thrown together. But I do encourage people to write, because you never know.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of those things that it's very. I'm just amazed at your output. I mean, the amount of books you've written, and the fact you're doing 3 different series. I mean, crikey! I mean, I'm struggling to get my 3rd book out in my main series, so it's just incredible what you've done. And I think one of the things one of the questions we had really from various people was, what is your process? I mean, describe your day for when you write.
Oh my! Well, you kind of mirrored me earlier when you were mentioning yours briefly, but I'm definitely a morning writer. I do value the concept that, of recent years, I've become very aware and valuing the concept that as a writer, I want to make sure I challenge myself to keep some reading time. And it could be comps, so books that are, I hate saying competitors, but books that are similarly put out in my genres, just to see what, there are basic trends, to see what people are interested in, decide, I don't really want to necessarily be heavily influenced by what other people write, but just to be aware what's out there. And so I always like to begin and end my day with a little bit of reading, in whatever form I can. And then my mornings are writing new material, and the afternoons all depend on what fire needs to be put out next. So that could be the editing, the marketing, the TikToks. working on formatting. And again, my other job is art. So if I get a commission in, I may have to take a couple afternoons and start working on a painting as I'm trying to process it out. So afternoons are free for all, depending on what needs to be done. And another thing that I've been doing since COVID began was to challenge myself to improve on my weak areas. So I wanted to be better at marketing and advertising. And I've been taking a lot of courses and lectures and listening to a lot of seminars about those kind of things. So kind of in the late evening, that's when I try to find some time to listen to those and just better improve myself and my business. Because when you're an author, it is a business, however you say it. But that's kind of how I structure my day in general. How about you?
Yeah, it sounds similar to me. And I have to say, there's a lot to juggle, isn't there? And I can understand why some people would prefer just, to get a traditional deal and, in a sense, just focus on the writing. But I must say, I've really enjoyed actually learning about all the other aspects too. I know it's a lot to juggle, but actually we get a lot of fun talking about the business and, trying the different sort of marketing ideas and, collaborating together. And actually as a family, it's been really nice to work together on something, which is great. So that's been really good. And one of my readers spoke earlier, and Sheena, she said that she wrote her first book for her son. So Sheena's a very successful author, and she wrote her first book for her son, who would not read fiction, and so she wrote that in her 50s.
Wow.
And just like me. So to some extent, those coming late to it really appreciate what we've got now, because having done a day job and that sort of stuff, actually to have the freedom to actually pursue something you really love, isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, and again, following your passion, it's less work than I guess a lot of other people's work. I mean, it's the same amount of effort and the same amount of struggle and the same amount of energy you put in and time, but if you're doing what you love, it's not as intimidating. It's not as oppressive. You actually might enjoy it. I do have a weird way of approaching my day. I get excited about going to work because it's fun. There's a lot of fun, and there are tears, and there are times when I'm frustrated and wanting to throw a pillow at the wall because for whatever reason something's not going right. But when you do and follow your passion, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it is. Agreed. Yeah, good. Wow. So I think we're about an hour, aren't we?
Yeah. See, time flies, and you were nervous.
Doing a course on TikTok at the moment. So one of the resources I found really helpful becoming an indie author is there's a great program we've got here in the UK called the Self-Publishing Formula by a chap called Mark Dawson.
I am aware of this. Actually, it was that course that inspired me to start doing live streams because, again, talking about trying to self-educate myself where I'm weak, that was one of those things that following the self-publishing formula, and they have so much courses and information available. It's impressive, but yeah, their newer module of TikTok was very fascinating, and again helped me be able to do this and talk with you. So I support that.
Well, a few of us actually are hoping to get because they're based in the UK. They've got their conference this summer. And so we're hoping to go to that in London in a few weeks' time. A few people are watching me tonight are just saying that, which is we're all looking forward to get together in London and actually finding out, how we're all coping with, TikTok and the various other things that we're doing. Because, there's so much happening at the moment, isn't there, in self-publishing and staying on top of it. It's really nice to have some friends who actually are going along it with you, because then you can compare notes and people work out different things themselves, which sometimes you don't pick up yourself when you're reading through the materials.
Well, I may be asking you for some notes after your thing, because I wish I could have attended. I actually have heard from of several different authors who are going, and I am so excited for you guys, and we'll be listening to see if you pass on any tidbits of information that you have gleaned from that event. But
Katharine, do you go to seminars and conferences for writers in the States?
I have not done it since, again, the pandemic began. but it was something that I did a few different conferences way early on, and I was gearing up to start doing them again when everything happened. And now that life is starting to pick up again, I'm hoping to maybe the next, not necessarily this year. This year I have a very crazy schedule, but in the next year or so, start doing that again, because there are a lot, conferences are fantastic ways to not only network, but, again, just brush up on information, because the publishing world, like you said, is constantly changing, and I totally support, going to those events.
Good, great, good. Wow. Well, thank you so much for helping me host this evening. It's been fantastic getting to know. Yeah, but I mean, it's just great getting to know you as well, because although we've exchanged messages on TikTok, it's actually really lovely to meet you sort of in person.
Yes,
and,
I know.
and
It's
have a
like,
chat.
this is the closest person that I've been able to do lately with fellow authors, so it's been very nice. But I hope maybe down the future, especially after you publish your third book, maybe we can do this again and reconnect and see what we have learned since this time.
That'd be great, Katharine, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and I'd just like to thank everyone who's been watching tonight. I mean, I've got
thank you.
people going off to get their food now, have their supper, so sorry to keep you so late, Sheena and people. So thank you so much for watching tonight, and I hope you all enjoyed it.
Yes, until next time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Katharine. Bye, everyone.